What gives a person the right to decide who lives and who dies? Is it anger? Fear? The need to control? Or is it something even more disturbing, a belief that some lives are worth less than others? In a world where people fight for the right to be seen, to be heard, to be accepted, there are still those who refuse to acknowledge that everyone has the freedom to exist as they are. They carry their judgments like weapons, convinced that their own discomfort is reason enough to take away another person's future. On a cold night in Atlanta, Georgia, one man made that choice. A choice that would leave a life cut short, a family shattered, and a city in shock. He believed he had been deceived. He convinced himself that he was the victim. And in the heat of that conviction, he picked up a knife. The scene he left behind was gruesome, blood pooling on the floor, a body left lifeless, a phone capturing the aftermath in chilling detail. Most killers try to hide their crimes. They erase messages, they cover their tracks, they run. But this man wanted the world to know. He took out his phone, snapped a picture, and posted it online. The caption was cold, merciless. A final insult to the person he had just murdered. Within minutes, the image spread across social media. Friends and family of the victim saw it before the police did. The comments were a mix of horror and applause, because in the dark corners of the internet, there are always people ready to justify violence. That a call to 911 came in just after midnight. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced, but the words she spoke were anything but ordinary. "We have a male victim, multiple stab wounds." Suspect posted it online. By the time officers arrived, the suspect was still in the apartment. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was sitting next to the body, as if waiting for someone to arrive and witness what he had done. This is the story of DeAndre Smith, a 27-year-old man who thought he had found companionship, only to be brutally murdered for nothing more than being himself. And the man who did it? He wanted the world to see. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling details of a case that shook Atlanta, and revealed the darkest side of human prejudice. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime cases that uncover the truth. It was November 17, 2023, a Friday night in Atlanta, Georgia. The city pulsed with energy, cars honking, music spilling from clubs, groups of friends laughing as they navigated the neon-lit streets. But inside the Oakwood Apartments in southwest Atlanta, a much different scene was unfolding. At 11:45 p.m., a brutal crime was committed. One that wouldn't stay in the shadows. One that would be displayed for the world to see. The victim, DeAndre Smith. DeAndre was 27 years old. A hairstylist by day, a part-time model on weekends, and a man who lit up every room he entered. Those who knew him described him as kind, outgoing, and confident. A person who never hesitated to be himself. He was active in the LGBTQ+ community, using his social media platforms to spread messages of self-love and acceptance. He had dreams of opening his own salon, of making a name for himself in the world of fashion and beauty. But like many young people trying to get ahead, he had bills to pay. And so, occasionally, he turned to an escort website to make extra money. DeAndre knew the risks. He had heard the horror stories. But he always told himself he was careful. He screened his clients. He never went anywhere without letting someone know where he was. That night, he thought he was in control. The suspect, Marcus Johnson. Marcus Johnson was 31 years old. A security guard with a strict, disciplined presence, he was the kind of man who prided himself on being a real man. He believed in traditional gender roles, and he made sure everyone knew it. His social media accounts were filled with aggressive rants about relationships, about loyalty, about what he thought made a man weak. He had a past. In 2020, he had been charged with assault after getting into a bar fight. Witnesses at the time described him as someone who snapped when things didn't go his way. To the outside world, Marcus was just another working man in Atlanta, but inside, something festered. A rage he couldn't always control. A fear he refused to admit. How they met that night. Marcus had been scrolling through an escort website. Looking. Searching. The details of what he wanted, what he was thinking, are lost to time. But at some point, his eyes landed on DeAndre's profile. They exchanged messages. The tone, at first, was light. DeAndre even joked about their first date. "You better be as handsome as you say, or I'm asking for a refund," he had texted, adding a laughing emoji. Marcus responded with a simple, "Don't worry. I got you." A time was set. A location was agreed upon. DeAndre, like always, let someone know where he was going. He sent a message to his best friend. "He seems cool. Wish me luck." At 11:30 p.m., he was seen entering the apartment. The door closed behind him. And from that moment, no one outside that room would hear from him again. Surveillance footage from the Oakwood apartments would later reveal the first signs that something wasn't right. At 11:15 p.m., Marcus Johnson stood outside the complex, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He rocked back and forth on his heels, his head turning sharply every few seconds as if looking for someone. But it wasn't the casual anticipation of a man excited for a date. It was different. There was tension in his posture, something restless and uneasy. At 11:25 p.m., he checked his phone, his fingers moving quickly as he typed. Seconds later, he looked up and scanned the parking lot. Then, he started pacing. Short, clipped strides. Back and forth. Back and forth. At 11:30 p.m., a car pulled up. DeAndre Smith stepped out, dressed in a fitted black jacket, hair freshly styled. He checked his phone. One last message to his best friend, before making his way toward the entrance. Marcus stopped pacing. He stood still. Watched. Then turned and walked inside. Seconds later, DeAndre followed, the door shut behind them. That was the last time DeAndre Smith was seen alive. It wasn't long before the quiet of the night was broken. Neighbors in the apartment complex would later tell investigators they heard voices, muffled at first, then raised. At 11:40 p.m., just 10 minutes after DeAndre had arrived, a neighbor 2 doors down paused her TV when she heard something that made her uneasy. A man's voice. Sharp. Accusatory. A second voice. Pleading. Then, a loud thud. For a few seconds, there was silence, and then, nothing. The neighbor hesitated, her finger hovering over the volume button on her remote. She glanced toward the wall, listening. When she didn't hear anything else, she turned her TV back up. If only she had knocked on the door. If only she had called someone. But in apartment complexes, people mind their business. And that night, no one wanted to get involved. Marcus Johnson would later claim that he had been tricked. That when DeAndre entered his apartment, when the truth of his identity was revealed, something inside him snapped. But text messages told a different story. Investigators combed through Marcus's phone and found conversations stretching back hours before the meetup. There was no deception. No secret. DeAndre had been honest. "You cool with that, right?" DeAndre had texted at 7:43 p.m. "Yeah, we good," Marcus had replied. So if Marcus knew, why did he go through with it? Why did he invite DeAndre inside? Why did he make him believe he was safe? Those were the questions investigators would ask him again and again, but Marcus never had an answer. The truth is, Marcus Johnson had been struggling with something long before that night. Social media posts painted a disturbing picture. In the months leading up to the murder, Marcus had shared posts filled with transphobic rhetoric. Aggressive memes. Violent jokes disguised as humor. "If I ever found out a dude tried to play me like that, it's over," he had commented on a post just weeks before. His friends would later describe him as someone who hated being embarrassed. A man whose pride meant more than reason. A man who would rather destroy something than admit he had wanted it in the first place. At 11:35 p.m., just minutes before the attack, DeAndre's best friend sat on her couch, phone in hand, staring at the screen. She had sent him another message. No reply. She told herself he was fine. He was probably just getting comfortable, chatting, having a drink. But something nagged at her. A feeling she couldn't shake. By midnight, she was calling his phone. By 12:15 a.m., she was texting again. By 12:30 a.m., she was pacing, and by 1 a.m., she knew something was wrong. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that by then, DeAndre Smith was already dead. At exactly 11:45 p.m., a loud crash echoed through the walls of the Oakwood Apartments. A neighbor, startled by the noise, paused halfway through brushing her teeth. She turned off the faucet, listening. A man's voice, booming, furious, shouted words she couldn't make out, then, a scream, short, desperate. Cut off too soon. Inside the apartment, Marcus Johnson stood over DeAndre Smith, his face twisted in rage. In his hand, a kitchen knife. The blade, sharp and gleaming, caught the dim light of the living room. DeAndre stumbled backward, hands raised, his breath coming fast. His voice shook. "Please, man." Marcus lunged. The first stab struck DeAndre's shoulder, the second, his stomach, the third, his ribs. DeAndre tried to fight back, hands grabbing at Marcus's arms, but the blows came too fast. Too violent. The fourth, the fifth, the sixth, blood splattered against the beige walls. Pooled onto the carpet. The seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the 10th, and finally, one last strike. Deep. Brutal. The knife tearing through muscle, puncturing a lung. DeAndre gasped, his body jerking before his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the floor, his hands trembling, blood soaking his clothes. His breaths, shallow. Choking, Marcus stepped back, chest rising and falling, gripping the knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. And then, the rage was gone. He looked down at the crime scene. Inside Oakwood Apartments was a portrait of brutality. Blood smeared the walls, the floor, the furniture, evidence of a struggle that had ended in unthinkable violence. DeAndre Smith's body lay motionless on the living room floor, his phone inches from his outstretched hand. The screen was still lit. The last message he had sent remained unsent. Detectives arrived within minutes of the first 911 call. The moment they stepped inside, the reality of what had happened became sickeningly clear. Marcus Johnson sat in the kitchen, hands resting on his knees, staring blankly at the ground. The knife, the weapon he had used to stab DeAndre 11 times, was still on the table beside him. He didn't resist when officers moved in. Didn't flinch when they snapped the handcuffs over his wrists. He only spoke once. "I warned people about this." The words sent a chill through every officer in the room. Over the next 48 hours, forensic teams combed through every inch of the apartment. The blood splatter patterns told a clear story. DeAndre had tried to flee. The droplets on the walls and furniture indicated movement, attempts to dodge the knife. He had fought to escape, but Marcus had been stronger, faster, and more determined. In DeAndre's bedroom, investigators found an open laptop. The screen still displayed a message thread with Marcus. The conversation revealed something chilling. Marcus had known DeAndre was transgender before the meeting. There had been no deception, no trap. DeAndre had been honest from the start. More damning evidence came from Marcus's phone. A search history that sent a wave of disgust through investigators. How to clean up a crime scene? How long does it take to bleed out from stab wounds? Can police track deleted messages? The searches had been made just hours before DeAndre arrived. This wasn't a moment of passion. It was planned. By the time the case went to trial in June 2024, the public outrage had reached a fever pitch. Inside the packed courtroom, DeAndre's mother sat in the front row, gripping a tissue so tightly it threatened to tear. She refused to look at Marcus, the man who had taken her son's life. The prosecution wasted no time painting a clear picture. This was a hate crime. Marcus had a history of violent, transphobic online posts. Witnesses described his short temper, his need to assert dominance in every situation. The Facebook post after the murder showed no remorse, only pride. This was not a crime of passion, the prosecutor told the jury. This was an execution. But the defense pushed back. They painted Marcus as a man who had been emotionally overwhelmed. They argued that he had been lied to and had reacted in a moment of rage. The jury watched the Facebook Live video. They saw Marcus, covered in blood, ranting about betrayal, about fake people. The horror on their faces was unmistakable. Some jurors turned away. One wiped their eyes. By the time closing arguments were made, there was no doubt. On July 15, 2024, the courtroom fell silent as the jury returned with their decision. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. The words came swift and final: guilty. First-degree murder. A sharp gasp echoed from DeAndre's mother. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her sister's hand. Marcus Johnson remained expressionless. No anger. No remorse. The judge did not hesitate in delivering the sentence. Life in prison. Without the possibility of parole. There would be no second chances. No appeals. Marcus was led away in shackles, disappearing behind the heavy doors of the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered. Protesters held signs demanding justice. Members of the LGBTQ+ community called for a hate crime charge, but under Georgia law, gender identity was not recognized under existing hate crime statutes. The injustice stung. At a press conference, DeAndre's family spoke through their grief. DeAndre was taken from us over ignorance, his mother said, her voice steady despite the pain. His life was not a mistake, his killer was. As the weeks passed, DeAndre's name became a rallying cry in the fight for stronger hate crime protections, but for his family, for his friends, for those who had loved him, no legal victory, no sentence, no reform could bring him back. He was gone, and all that remained was the question that had haunted this case from the very beginning: who gave Marcus Johnson the right to decide who should live and who shouldn't? In the days and weeks that followed Marcus Johnson's conviction, one question continued to haunt those who followed the case. How did it come to this? A man went online, met someone, invited them into his home, and within an hour, that meeting ended in murder. Was it ever about deception, or was it about control? The evidence showed Marcus knew exactly who DeAndre was before he ever sent that first message. His social media history proved he had a deep resentment for people who lived their lives outside of his rigid beliefs. He wasn't blindsided, he was looking for an excuse, and when the moment came, he took it. But this case wasn't just about one man's deadly prejudice. It was about the dangers of meeting people online, how a friendly conversation can turn into something far more dangerous. It was about the rise of hate-fueled violence, how bigotry, left unchecked, can become deadly. And it was about the way social media is turning into a stage for crime and confession. Marcus didn't just kill DeAndre. He broadcasted his hate for the world to see, and the worst part, he knew there would be people who would agree with him. So now, we turn the conversation over to you. Do you believe this was premeditated murder, or do you think it was a crime of passion? Should social media companies be held accountable when criminals use their platforms to spread violence? And most importantly, what can be done to stop tragedies like this from happening again? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you think, and if you want more in-depth crime stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because every crime has a final truth, and here, we tell it.